channel on WhatsApp. Message your comments or call WinFM at 466-0989, 662-0989, or call our U.S. numbers from anywhere, 718-285-6984, 305-921-4619, and call our sales office at 466-9586. Voices, now 10 to 12 a.m. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Money Matters, 1 to 2 p.m. Monday afternoon. And Inside the News, Saturdays, 10 to 12 noon on WinFM 98.9.
Welcome to Island Tea with your faves. Keep it locked in with us for your daily dose of hot tea, only on Win Media 98.9.
And we are back on Island Tea, and as promised, it's time for Weekly Dose with Dr. Natalie Osborne. And as I mentioned before, our topic for today is about antibiotics, but more specifically, antibiotic resistance. Good morning, Doc, and welcome back to Weekly Dose. How are you doing this week?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good. I'm always happy to be here. So this is a beautiful morning here. And we are going to be talking about antibiotic resistance specifically. And storytelling time. I met about 2 weeks ago a young adult male in his 40s who presented with a swelling to the upper arm. He said, just randomly, curiously, had a little pimple or something on the arm there. And then he realized he was picking at it. He played with it. You know, sometimes you feel a little bump on your skin and you kind of messed around and scratched it. And then over the following days, it started becoming swollen. So the forearm or the upper limb arm got grossly swollen. And then this individual eventually came to the hospital and developed an abscess secondary to the cellulitis, which is just the infection of the tissue. Had a surgical intervention to drain the pus out and tested the sample of the pus. We call that a culture to see what it shows, what type of bacteria, and to ensure if we had the correct antibiotics use for the patient, and found that he had what we call MRSA. I'm sure lots of persons would have heard that, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and that is one of those superbugs are bugs that are resistant to commonly used antibiotic. So usually there is a story behind the discussion and the topic. So then, of course, we're going to talk about all the implications and why some of this thing happen. So the former director of the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control in the United States, says if we use antibiotics when we don't need them, we may not have them when they are most needed. And that is where the world is going to now. And we know that antibiotic resistance is one of the world's biggest global situation, because what's happening, lots of underdeveloped countries, when there is an infection and there's limited resources, and then these antibiotics that are easy accessible, the cheaper antibiotics, they would not be able to be used. They would have no effectiveness. So they'll lose their effectiveness because of the resistance. And we're having lots of that. Then having to produce more and more antibiotics, which are much more expensive over time. All right, so that is why we're going to discuss antibiotic resistance. And we know in our small setting, we have a major problem with that, because individuals go and see their doctor, and if they have the cold and they feel like they cannot leave without having something, and the doctors sometimes feel psychologically that they're pressured. The patient came to see me, and a 15-minute conversation. When I went, why did I go to that doctor? He didn't even give me nothing for no treatment. Yeah. And we get that. And so sometimes psychologically you feel like you have to give something. So let's get right into our discussion.
Okay, so what are antibiotics?
So antibiotics, we know that these are medicines that help to stop infection, specifically bacteria. So back in the early years, you remember Alexander Fleming, I think 1928, around that time, he accidentally developed the first type of antibiotic, the penicillin. And from the we developed all the other antibiotics over time. And at that point, that antibiotic was so widely used and was such a medical success because it killed a lot of the bacteria, common bacteria that had wiped out thousands and thousands of individuals at that time. And then once they started using and implementing these antibiotics, we had better outcome, lower disease rates, better mortality, decreased mortality, and these persons did much better. So we realized that antibiotics were very effective and they have their use. So they're specific to bacteria, okay?
Okay, so only for bacterial use. So let's speak about antibiotic resistance. What is it?
So antibiotic resistance occurs when the bacteria changes and the antibiotic no longer is effective. When you have a bacteria circulating around, so you take on the antibiotic, that's like the enemy to the bacteria, like the war machine, and it's coming and it's to destroy it. But what happens with these bacteria over time, and it happens with viruses, fungus too, they can create their own resistance, but we're specifically talking about bacteria. So what happens? The bacteria said, oh, you're coming, I'm going to start to change and mutate my body, and I put on a tougher exterior, tougher shell. So when the antibiotic comes in as the chemical to kill it, it no longer can. And then that is where you have development of these antibiotic resistance. And then you're pouring in all of these antibiotics and not getting the response that you want.
So does that mean what do you call it?
Antibiotics, the antibiotics?
Yeah, that means the antibiotics are mutating.
No, the bug or the bacteria.
The antibiotics.
The antibiotic is the chemical that we use to kill the bacteria. So it's the bacteria that creates that mutation and becomes resistant to the drug.
Okay.
Okay, let me make it as simple as I can. You're coming at me and you are the police, for example, and you have your tough machine gun and stuff. I would now develop my resistance by making sure I put on my bulletproof vest and all these things. So now when you come to destroy me, I am resistant to you. So the bacteria is what becomes resistant to the antibiotic.
Okay. And why is antibiotic resistance dangerous?
So that is an important point now. So that is going to be part of the crux of our discussion here. Why is it dangerous? Because it increases the risk of severe infection. A common bug that enters your body, oftentimes, can be knocked out in 3 days with a good antibiotic. But if there is a resistance, your time of illness would be prolonged. Your hospitalization would be prolonged because of these resistance. Your medical costs would increase. Your chance of developing severe complication that can lead to limb loss. So if you have a severe infection in the foot by a bacteria that is resistant to most of the drugs that we use, that can be very aggressive, the infection, and severe, and that can lead to limb loss, which is a morbidity now in your life. It's changed your life and altered your life, and it can lead to death. So, and it's gonna make your medical expenses more. You leave the hospital because of the severe infection. You have much more doctor's visits. You need to follow up more because you have to keep a check on some of these things that are going on.
Wow. What causes antibiotic resistance?
So we all got to know that naturally bacteria, like any organism, wants to survive, wants to live and thrive. Yeah. It's a microorganism. And so over time, we're naturally going to have some resistance. But what we as humans have done over time is assist and sped up this resistance. So there's some of these reasons. The misuse of antibiotics. What do I mean when I say misuse of antibiotics? If you take antibiotics when you have a viral infection or fungal infection, it plays no real role there. But then we develop that resistance. So going to the physician and asking for antibiotics when you have the common cold or you have a viral illness really doesn't give you any support because the antibiotics are specific to bacteria, not for virus. Sometimes we forget to take our antibiotic. We do not finish the course. So you have an incomplete course. Remember, antibiotics were studied for their frequency in which you may use them, like how often you use them, and how long you may use them. So if your doctor indicate that you should take your antibiotics for a week, twice a day, and you said you take it once a day, and you said, I start to feel better, and by day 3 or day 4, you stop taking it, you may have killed some of these bacteria. Say we have 100 bacteria circulating and you kill 50 of them. That's 50% by the end of the first 3 days. What happens now? The next 50% is left there because you've taken away the killer for them, and then they develop changes and mutation over time. And so then you realize that next time you have a similar infection, there's resistance to it. So misusing your antibiotics is a problem. Persons often, they may not feel so well, and their mother have some antibiotics there that she's taking, and they grab a couple of them and they take them. And so that would happen. There's something that also called spontaneous resistance. So sometimes naturally the genetic makeup of the bacteria change and mutates over on its own. So that's going to be part of the natural course of these bacteria, because every creature is trying to survive, okay? And so after a while, the antibiotics is not beneficial. And there's some what we call transmitted resistance. Because we interact with each other and we're in this community, we know that you can have contagious drug-resistant bacteria. So it's contagious in the environment. You come in contact with your mother who's sick and who has a bacteria in her and that has developed a resistance, and then she passes that bacteria over onto you that has that resistance. And what happens, that bacteria multiplies, and if you get sick, when you get that antibiotic, it's always resistant to that antibiotic, and it doesn't give you the outcome that you want, the desired outcome.
Let us talk about who is most at risk for antibiotic-resistant infections.
So antibiotic-resistant infection can affect anybody. But of course, we're going to have the weaker in our community that we always need to protect, okay? But some, such as our babies, our newborns, our infants, their immune system is very underdeveloped, so we've got to protect them. So that can be a problem. If they have an infection, that can lead to some poor outcomes. Persons who are over the age of 65, as we all get older, our body change, our defense mechanism lowers, and we are more at risk of developing any kind of infection or resistance to antibiotics. What about persons who are in those communities, homeless individual, crowded communities where there's so much overcrowding? Persons are at an increased risk, okay? Persons who have an immune compromised system, we know that. Persons who are HIV positive, they can develop infections quite easily because their body cannot defend itself. Persons who are diabetic, persons who have kidney disease, persons who have lupus, they're at increased risk. And persons who take antibiotics for long term. There may be a time where your doctor, because of a certain condition you may be placed on an antibiotic for a period of time that may exceed maybe 20 days, 21 days, and then you're at risk now to developing more infections, okay, over time.
Why is antibiotic resistance a problem?
So we talk about this as time goes by, as the mutation and changes in the bacteria, it's going to become a problem because what? We're going to have to keep producing new antibiotics, and the antibiotics that we have become ineffective or non-effective. And then what? A person gets an infection, and the infection can be life-changing, life-altering, that can lead to death. Okay? And it's a global health problem. And so that is why lots of persons need to be involved with this so that we can decrease the resistance to the bacteria, to the antibiotics that we have. Because it then becomes very costly on the healthcare system. So all of this is a part of healthcare prevention, using your antibiotics correctly in the timely manner. And if you do not need antibiotics, do not consume them, because with the resistance, it affects the entire healthcare system. And then you go into communities where you know that common Antibiotics are no longer effective. And some of the most cost-effective antibiotics are what? Like the penicillins that we use on a daily basis. But soon, if we continue to abuse them, then you realize we're going to have to get more and more expensive drugs, because we realize that when the doctor prescribed the penicillins, they're not working anymore, and because we've developed that resistance in the community.
I was just going to ask how that penicillin managed to still be around, because as you mentioned, we could develop a resistance to it. So is it that they made it stronger over the years? Or?
Yes, because over time what has happened with the antibiotic, there's combined it with different drugs to increase the potential or the strength of it over time too. And in communities that do not abuse antibiotics, you can find that these simpler and the original antibiotics can be used and be used effectively. But of course, over time, and the market pushes you, because there's a financial cause in this too, where the market pushes you to buy the more expensive drug, the newer drug on the market, when we know that the more common ones are still effective in a community that has not abused this drug.
Okay. So which is the largest? Which industry is the largest consumer of antibiotics?
So this one is very important. We're talking about the largest consumer of antibiotics is the agriculture industry. And we hear about it all the time. So we're treating the livestock. Think about it. These chickens and these pigs, these cattle, they're on a farm and there are thousands of them. So that is overcrowding. So if one of these chicken develop an infection, it spreads throughout the group there in the farmhouse. And what happens? The farmer comes in, he gets these large quantity of antibiotics, put them in their feed to try and decrease any infection, because that's going to affect his bottom line. So he wants to make sure that his animals do not die off because of a severe infection. And also antibiotics are used to increase the growth of these animals that we use for food. And so in 2006, the European Union banned the use of antibiotics in livestock for growth, because they realized once they kept giving the animals these antibiotics, they became bigger when they swelled up, and so it became almost like a secondary benefit, because originally it was like to treat the infection, but they realized that they developed quicker, they become bigger quicker, and so then that is one of the reasons, because your meat looks fluffy, juicier, ready to go to the market.
How does that, I know that's not a question, but how would that affect us, the consumer that eats the meat?
Well, I like that you asked that question, because once you eat the meat as a consumer too, these animals will develop bacterial resistance, antibiotic resistance, right? They will develop antibiotic resistance, and we would consume some of these antibiotic resistant bacteria when we eat them in these undercooked meats, sometimes the ill-prepared meats. And that is how then there is cross-contamination now from animals to humans, and we develop these bacteria and get this cross-contamination. Then when we go and use the antibiotics, we realize that it's not responding, because these antibiotics that were used
to grow the meat,
the bacteria develop resistance. We consume that bacteria, it still has the same resistance. And you say, but I have never abused antibiotics. How come I'm having this severe infection now? But because of the cross-contamination.
Wow. Boy. What are superbugs?
So superbugs are nothing more than these bacteria, virus, fungus, or germ, but in this case, we're talking about bacteria that become resistant to the antibiotic. So yet again, we go back to our illustration of thinking about the military. So now you have top gear and you're protecting yourself. And so you're much more resistant now. And anytime the antibiotic comes in, you are stronger against this antibiotic and getting stronger, and you're just bouncing off the bullets or the shots that the antibiotic is taking at you. They're chemicals, and it's not affecting this bacteria. What happens then? Remember, these bacteria are multiplying, so every time they have their new bacteria, they divide and multiply. They're creating all of this antibiotic resistant bacteria. And so when you have these superbugs, they're much more difficult to treat. And we spoke about it earlier, longer stay in the hospital. You have to use more and more expensive drugs to treat these patients, okay? And they can lead to poorer outcomes.
Oh boy. How can we combat antibiotic resistance?
So combating antibiotic resistance, that's a job for the global industry for all of us to participate in. We could start with basic things like good hygiene, protecting yourself from infection so you won't need to use an antibiotic, okay? You want to use antibiotics only when you need them. You want to get vaccinated. You may think that it's not related for these viral illnesses, because that is what leads a lot of people to their doctor to ask for antibiotics when they have viral illnesses. So you take, your vaccines and making sure, because if you have the necessary vaccines, remember we have pneumococcal vaccines, you have the vaccines that we use for things like tuberculosis, because all of these diseases needs antibiotics. So you want to make sure you get the necessary vaccines so that you can prevent these antibiotics. So that is one of the reasons you want to combat it. You want to make sure that you do not overuse antibiotics, as we said earlier. Doctors, we have a responsibility of not over-prescribing it and not to feel that emotional bully or need to do something for the patient. Okay, everything's going to be resolved in either 14 days or 2 weeks. The virus is going to take its course. And persons have to make sure, because the individual has a responsibility to complete the course of the antibiotic as well too. That's what you have to do. And take it as prescribed. You don't want to overuse it in livestock, as we spoke about earlier, and in the farming industry and fishing industry. And you want to make sure that we encourage hygienes, and we want to develop new antibiotics too. So everybody has a role. Scientists need to be doing that to try and develop new antibiotics. Healthcare administrators need to be going out there advocating and indicating to persons the correct use of these antibiotics.
I'm going to throw a question in that I don't see here. But what if you you prescribe the medication, you have to take it at a certain time. What if you miss a dose? How does that affect the antibiotic working for you?
Okay. You miss a dose. Correctly, when these antibiotics are studied, it's a lot of mechanics and mechanism behind it. But they were studied and they realized that every 12 hours, for example, is the most effective, every 8 hours. So you keep that antibiotic peaked in your system where it is most effective. Okay? Like the percentage or the quantity of the antibiotic. And so you want to, so then you realize that it's most effective to giving it every 12 hours. But here's what. We're humans and we're going to err. So if you take the antibiotic not at the 12th hour but at the 11th hour or at the 13th hour, an hour or two doesn't make a big difference. What we do not want, if you're prescribed it every 12 hours, you only take it once a day, because it means then it's going to peak and then it's going to drop off, and then you wouldn't have that coverage, because you got to, the antibiotics is the chemical that is killing this bacteria, and you got to keep your assault on it. You have to keep your assault on it, so you do not stop until you eliminate this bacteria. So what happens if it peaks and then it drops off and you do not take your next dose? You're giving the bacteria a chance to get stronger as well too.
Wow. So let us talk about how do healthcare providers treat antibiotic-resistant bacteria? So
we have to acknowledge that this is going to be a bit limited and much more difficult. So we're looking for different types of antibiotics, a combination of antibiotics now, because now you're having resistance and we realize we've got to put on an additional antibiotics, 2 antibiotics instead of 1, 3 antibiotics depend. And then if you know you had a cheaper antibiotic, now you've got to use the more expensive antibiotic, which is the latest generation. Now where you could have given the person an oral antibiotic, you now have to admit them, and only an IV antibiotic may be effective at that time. So this is how it's going to be. And of course it creates a lot of expenses, not only to the individual but to the healthcare industry and the institution.
Wow. Are new antibiotics being developed?
I like this question. Are new antibiotics being developed? what is happening? Antibiotics have become so unprofitable. So the market and the major companies, pharmaceutical companies, are running away from creating new antibiotics because it's not as profitable. And I'll tell you why. So if you develop a new drug and it works well, how often contentia you're going to have to use that antibiotics? You use it and it's done because it works well. So there's not going to be a great demand for that antibiotics. Think about it. And so then, if you want the antibiotic to remain longer on the market, you've got to use it sparingly. That's not profitable for the pharmaceutical companies because they make their monies every time you order or you purchase this drug, okay? So it is not the same as having diabetes or hypertension or your cholesterol high, where your drugs, you take these medications on a daily basis for the rest of your life. With antibiotics, it's for a set period and then it's done. And so that's not profitable to a lot of these things. So then, earlier antibiotics, another factor too, had broad spectrum, meaning these earlier antibiotics, you could have used them for a wide variety of bacterial infection. But because we've developed so much resistance, most of these newer antibiotics are very specific. So if you're on antibiotics that can only treat one particular type of bacteria, how often that is going to be needed in the community? So a lot of these pharmaceutical companies are running away from doing antibiotics because it's not as profitable as it once was. Okay, and these are the factors. It's not going to be used constantly like a drug for your high blood pressure that you take every day. And so we're talking about demand in the market.
So what if we have a serious bacterial infection? What then?
Well, that is where think about it. And I go to COVID. Remember the COVID outbreak? The pharmaceutical companies went into their lab and billions of dollars was put behind these drugs so that they can be produced in a shorter time.
COVID was viral, right?
Yeah, COVID was viral,
Okay.
but I use that just as an example
Okay.
to show if there become a time when we have a severe or global
they're gonna
bacterial,
rush
they can put more effort then because now in that way the pharmaceutical company is going to see the benefit and the profits. Think
We might
about
lose
it.
some people during that time, just like we did during the COVID.
You said it.
Oh boy.
But you cannot make a super antibiotic, for example, unless there's a need. So there is, you have to understand that.
Supply and demand.
Yes, it's going to be supply and demand. So it's very important to know that this antibiotic resistance, it takes the entire community, where the healthcare provider, the patient themselves, we need the lawmakers and persons who lobby and put policies in place. We also need the scientists who are developing these antibiotics and via the pharmaceutical companies. So it's a multi-team effort so that we can decrease bacterial resistance.
We have a call. You want to
Go
take
ahead.
it?
Caller, good morning. You're live on Weekly Dose.
A very pleasant day to you.
Pleasant day to you as well.
Yeah, is this WinFM?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. Could you tell me my name is Euphemia Bryce Roberts. Could you tell me the email address? I wanted to send a press release. I sent it to an address that I thought was yours, but it seems not to have been delivered.
Okay, give us 1 second.
Thanks.
I think I have an email address. Federation. Let me see.
Who am I speaking to?
You're currently on air on Weekly Dose.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I don't have it. I don't know how we'll be able to get that to you though.
You want to give me a number and we'll get back to you.
Okay. 465-8044.
8044. And the name you mentioned, you said?
Bryce Roberts,
Okay.
BRICE-Roberts.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're
And who am I
welcome.
speaking to?
Cortensia.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye.
You may go ahead.
Ready.
Sorry about that.
These things happen. Doc, you can continue on.
No, so we need to be able to combat these antibiotic resistance, and so that we can limit the spread of these bacteria and stuff. We talk about some of the most important thing. We mentioned that everybody play a part with it, and we want to emphasize as well to that visiting your physician is not always about getting a quick fix. It's about sometimes reassurance, having a conversation, and just ruling out anything that is can be detrimental. And then once we've concluded between you and the physician that is just a viral illness, you're not feeling pressured to be given antibiotic or to use antibiotics, because we don't want to develop or worsen any antibiotic resistance.
Should antibiotics be given for a viral infection?
No, it should not.
Okay.
I get persons are still coming to the physician wanting the antibiotics, and if you're not able to explain clearly with a deep scientific knowledge, the patient would leave thinking that you are ill-equipped as a physician and ignore your recommendations. There are times where you can start with a viral infection, and then it can prolong, and you can become infected secondarily by bacteria. That's a difference, okay? Because then you can start with something viral, and your body is not able to resist, and you have weakened immune system, and then it can lead to a secondary infection.
Could you give us an example where something viral can lead to a bacterial infection?
Yeah, well, a specific case, persons have started with an upper respiratory tract infection, but their immune system wasn't able to handle it.
Okay.
Then their lung can be overloaded with all of this mucus development. The mucus builds up there, and then it gets infected secondarily. You can then develop a pneumonia. And so it does happen in rare occasions. But the common cold and the common viral illnesses will not be treated adequately with antibiotics, and it plays no role. Here's what happens, because a lot of times it's psychological. The patient is getting better, and they would have gotten better, but they have the antibiotic on board, and they thought that the antibiotic was the solution. Within the 2 weeks, you were going to get better anyway, because your body was able to then fight off this virus.
Yeah.
But then you start taking the antibiotic at the second week, you say, boy, doc, the antibiotic worked, give me another set. Patients come to the office and also ask you for antibiotic. Oh, I remember when I'd seen Dr. Wilkerson and he had given me this antibiotic and it had worked so well. I remember I'd seen Dr. Haley and he had given me this antibiotic and it had worked so well. And they basically are pressuring you now to give them said antibiotics when you may not find that there is a need or an indication for it. And so you may be seen as the bad doctor, maybe. But maybe that situation and that condition was different then.
Yeah, exactly. So as patients, we shouldn't want to bully the doctor for what we think is going to... And that's the funny thing, And that's why I tell people things work differently at different times. Because what worked then may not work now.
And your condition may be different.
Exactly.
Oh, I had the same pain in my tummy and the doctor had given me this and it worked.
Listen, I never go and tell the doctor what I want. The doctor needs to see me and
evaluate
and then prescribe. I can't tell the doctor I want this, I want that. Listen, as humans, we're a funny set of people. Anything else to add, Doc?
No, it's been good to be here. Any other comments or questions? But I hope that the audience have learned from this and understanding where we talk about antibiotic resistant. So it's not that you are resistant, you as a human being, you as a body, it's the bacteria becomes resistant to the antibiotic that you are consuming. And so we develop these superbugs and it becomes much more difficult. And especially if you have a weakened immune state, condition, you are more susceptible to developing severe infections with poor outcome. So we want to emphasize that when you see your physician, not all the time, sometimes you do have a bacterial infection, but it could be minor where your body is enough to put up a defense on its own, and it resolves it in a day or two because it's a mild infection.
Yeah.
And so we've got to be more careful in prescribing antibiotics and thinking that it's the cure-all to everything.
Indeed. All right, Doc. Thank you so much for coming and educating us. We appreciate you doing this for us every week. And for our audience that's listening, we hope that you would have garnered the information that you need. And please don't go bullying the doctors for antibiotics, okay? When you need it, they'll prescribe it.
WINN is 98.9. 98.9 is WIN FM.
The importance of co-parenting. Every child has the right to bond with the parents that gave them life. Children are happiest when they can freely communicate and enjoy the time, talents, and lessons that each parent brings to the relationship.
We make co-parenting difficult when we focus on differences rather than what is in the best interest of our children. Parents, your relationship with each other should never affect the relationship you have with your child. Celebrate your children together. They deserve your best. A message brought to you by the Department of Probation and Child Protection Services. Contact us at 467-1311 or 662-6833 for more information.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib. It's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
Heritage matters to me. Heritage matters to you. Join me, Percival Hanley, this coming Friday and every other Friday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon for Heritage Matters on Win Media SKN 98.9. Heritage matters to me. Heritage matters to you.
Special. Running April 3rd to April 16th. Now our Value Club Blue Tag specials. Meatless pastas are just $5.99 each. Banquet chicken nuggets and tenders just $24.99. Blue ribbon ice cream $32.99. Essential everyday frozen vegetables $5.99. Morningstar meatless entrees just $20.99. Tide liquid detergent $34.99. And now our very low weekly
value deals. Suavitel fabric softener $17.99. The Pearl pancake mixes $11.99. Multi-meal bagged cereals $17.99. All El Paso taco shells and tortilla shells $9.99. The Colgate toothpaste $6.99. Colgate toothbrush soft and medium $4.99. Shop Smart, Shop Value Mart. Tell them in Spanish.
Sea listo y haga sus compras aquí en Value Mart.
It's the start of the week. It's time for a new perspective. It's time for Unfiltered. Join Azar Gums, lawyer and deputy leader of the People's Action Movement, for raw and unfiltered political analysis of the current events in St. Kitts and Nevis. Tune in every Sunday evening from 7:30 p.m. on WIN FM. Join Azar Gums as he breaks the mantle and cuts through the unfiltered political noise to bring you the facts. Unfiltered every Sunday evening on WIN FM 98.9.
Welcome to Island Tea with your faves. Keep it locked in with us for your daily dose of hot tea only on WIN Media 98.9.